Roman Reigns shocks WWE Universe by returning to Raw with Jon Moxley. Paul Heyman's reaction says it all. Just when you thought the war was over, the tribal chief is back, and he's not alone. Roman Reigns storms WWE RAW alongside Jon Moxley, reuniting part of the Shield and launching a full-scale assault on Seth Rollins' faction. Paul Heyman is left stunned, speechless, and possibly betrayed. In this dramatic twist, witness the return that flips the WWE landscape on its head. From betrayal to alliance, chaos to confrontation, this is one backstage power shift you don't want to miss. What if I told you that one moment on WWE RAW just shattered everything we thought we knew about the Shield, the Bloodline, and the future of the entire company? What if I told you that Roman Reigns, the man who walked away from the spotlight, from the chaos, from the betrayal, just walked back into the fire with a vengeance that no one saw coming? And what if the man at his side was the most unpredictable wild card in wrestling history? On a night that was supposed to be about rebuilding, about recovering, about finding peace after weeks of pain and silence, the world changed. One theme song hit. One man walked through the curtain. And the WWE Universe hasn't been the same since. This is not just about a return. This is a declaration of war. Let's go back. Just a few days ago, the WWE landscape was in freefall. Seth Rollins, the World Heavyweight Champion, had been ruled out of SummerSlam 2025 due to a catastrophic knee injury. The architect was broken, physically, emotionally, and symbolically. The man who stood at the center of the Raw universe was now watching from a hospital bed, his dreams of a main event SummerSlam shattered like his ligament. The locker room was leaderless. The fans, divided. And Paul Heyman, well, he was smiling. Because Paul Heyman thought he'd won. In his mind, everything was finally in place. Seth was out. The chaos was quieting down. He had his fingers in every power structure, manipulating talent from the shadows, whispering to new allies and cutting off old ones. He had Solo Sikoa rising. Jacob Fatu aligning. Heyman believed he was the architect now. Not Rollins. Not Reigns. Him. But here's the thing about Paul Heyman. He's always underestimated one man. Roman Reigns. You see, while the world speculated where Roman had gone, was he retired? Sick? Embarrassed? Finished? He was watching. Studying. Waiting. For what? For weakness. For blood in the water. For betrayal to fully bloom. And then, just when the storm seemed to pass, the thunder came. It happened on Raw. It started like any other night. The crowd buzzing, but confused. The commentary team talking circles around Seth Rollins' injury, hyping up an open slot at SummerSlam, teasing the possibility of a surprise opponent to keep the card alive. Paul Heyman, seen briefly backstage, looked calm. Controlled. He even smirked when cameras passed him. Then the lights flickered. And the crowd, God bless them, they knew. It wasn't a technical glitch. It was something primal. A feeling. A pulse in the air that hadn't been felt since WrestleMania. And when those lights shut off completely, and that first note of the Truth Reigns hit the speakers, thousands of people leapt to their feet. No one moved. The cameras didn't cut. The commentary team went completely silent. And then Roman Reigns walked out. Not limping. Not defeated. Not broken. Focused. Stronger. And not alone. Because just a few steps behind him, wearing all black, with that signature snarl that once defined an entire generation of WWE chaos, was Jon Moxley. Not Dean Ambrose. Jon Moxley. It was like someone ripped open the past and poured gasoline on it. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They screamed. Because they didn't understand yet. They didn't know what was happening. Was this a return? A reunion? A betrayal? A dream? A nightmare? Roman and Moxley didn't speak. They didn't smile. They walked, shoulder to shoulder, through the smoke like soldiers returning from exile. They didn't acknowledge the fans. They didn't even look at the camera. They were focused on one thing. The ring. But this story isn't just about that entrance. This story is about why it happened. How we got here. And what comes next. Because Roman Reigns didn't return because he missed the spotlight. He returned because the empire he built was being stolen from him, brick by brick. By Paul Heyman. By Seth Rollins. By the very people he once bled with. Let's go back even further, because this betrayal didn't start last month. It didn't start with Seth's injury. It started years ago. In a hallway. In a triple powerbomb. In a brotherhood that was always one spark away from burning down. The Shield was never built to last. From the moment they debuted, there was a ticking clock. 3 dominant personalities. 3 conflicting ideologies. 3 men who would eventually destroy each other. And they did. Over and over again. Seth turned on Roman. Roman surpassed both Seth and Dean. Dean walked out of the company altogether. But somewhere deep in the core of that chaos was respect. And that's why this return hits harder than any spear. Because Jon Moxley is not a company man. He doesn't care about merchandise, brands, or tribalism. He hates WWE. He hates what it did to him. He said it in interviews. On podcasts. In his book. He swore he'd never come back. And yet, he walked down that ramp, not for Vince McMahon. Not for Triple H. Not for a paycheck. But for Roman Reigns. Because this isn't about contracts. It's about closure. It's about power. And maybe, just maybe, it's about something else too. Redemption. When Roman stood at the top of the ramp, camera pulled tight on his eyes, and the crowd still roaring in confusion, he leaned forward, whispered something to Moxley, and then marched forward. Every step he took was a statement. And backstage, when the feed cut to Paul Heyman, watching on a monitor with a hand over his mouth, you could see the realization wash over him. He's lost control. The monster he helped build, the tribal chief, the head of the table, was back. And he wasn't just back to reclaim his crown. He was back to burn the table down. And here's the thing about Roman Reigns, when he moves, it's never spontaneous. It's strategy. He returned now, not because he needed to, but because this was the moment where his enemies were weakest. Seth Rollins is injured. The bloodline is fractured. Paul Heyman is desperate. The entire WWE is distracted. And just like that, Roman flipped the entire board with one entrance, and one partner by his side who doesn't play by any rules. So, what does this mean? Is the Shield back? No. This isn't nostalgia. This is war. This is Roman Reigns writing the final chapter of a story that started in 2012, but was never truly finished. Because the Shield didn't break up. It exploded. And now, 13 years later, that fallout is coming full circle, inside an arena packed with fans who never thought they'd witness this moment. Paul Heyman's silence is more telling than any promo. He built Roman Reigns. He manipulated Seth Rollins. He abandoned Jon Moxley. And now all of them are converging, again. But this time, Roman isn't looking for gold. He's looking for vengeance. So the question becomes, where does the WWE go from here? The main event of SummerSlam is in chaos. Seth Rollins is out. Paul Heyman has been publicly humiliated. Jon Moxley is back. And Roman Reigns just reminded everyone why he's not just the face of the company, he's the final boss of the industry. The storm is here. And this time, it's personal. It's been said that silence is louder than any scream. And in the weeks following Seth Rollins' devastating knee injury, silence consumed WWE RAW like a creeping fog over a battlefield. The crowd noise remained, the matches went on, the promos aired. But something was missing. Something vital. The heart of the show. The War of Raw had come to a sudden standstill, not with resolution, but with confusion. The battlefield remained, but its generals had disappeared. Roman Reigns was gone. Seth Rollins was broken. And Paul Heyman? He was smiling again. For the first time in over a year, there was no clear leader on Monday Night Raw. No architect building the vision. No tribal chief casting shadows. The pulse of the show was irregular, too fast at times, other times deathly still. The fans noticed. The superstars noticed. The whole locker room felt like it was waiting, but no one knew what for. Seth Rollins' injury didn't just pull a man out of action, it decapitated an entire faction. He was the heartbeat of Raw's resistance. The man who took on the Bloodline, who rallied Paul Heyman's enemies, who pulled the strings from inside the ring and beyond. And when his knee gave out, when that X-ray scan confirmed a fracture too severe to hide, everything stopped. There was no torch to pass. There was no fallback plan. Just chaos. Some called it karma. Others called it coincidence. But behind closed doors, people began to whisper a darker theory, that maybe, just maybe, this injury was no accident. That Seth Rollins, WWE's golden visionary, had become a threat so great that forces backstage were ready to watch him fall. Whether it was the strain of constant war, or something more sinister, we may never know. But the effect was the same. Raw was vulnerable. Superstars scrambled for position. Finn Balor and Damian Priest teased dominance. Cody Rhodes tried to step up but lacked the grit of a war general. Sami Zayn pleaded for unity, but the crowd didn't believe he could command it. The Miz mocked the entire situation, as if the empire crumbling around him wasn't worth acknowledging. And all the while, a ghost loomed over them. An invisible presence no one dared name. Roman Reigns. Because if Seth Rollins' injury created a power vacuum, everyone knew who could fill it. And yet, weeks passed. And still, no Roman. He didn't post on social media. No interviews. No training footage. No appearances at airports or gyms. Even his closest allies, Solo Sikoa, Jimmy Uso, remained tight-lipped. WWE officials were forced to play dumb. In production meetings, his name wasn't even mentioned. It was as if he had become a forbidden word. But the absence spoke volumes. Because here's what no one in WWE wanted to say out loud: for all his dominance, for all his historic title reigns and tribal war cries, Roman Reigns had vanished. Not like a hero, but like a threat retreating into the shadows. And Paul Heyman? He saw opportunity. No longer shackled to Roman's silent authority, Heyman began stitching together a new power base. One built not on respect, but on desperation. He whispered promises into Solo Sikoa's ear. He brokered deals with Jacob Fatu behind production trucks. He hinted at a new vision for the Bloodline, one that didn't need Reigns. One that would reshape SmackDown and Raw under Heyman's intellect alone. To the outside world, Heyman was managing chaos. But in truth, he was orchestrating it. When cameras caught him backstage in a hushed conversation with Bronson Reed, many assumed it was nothing. But days later, Bronson was inserted into a main event. When Heyman lingered near Gunther's dressing room, rumors exploded. Was he trying to recruit Imperium? Was he trying to align with the enemy? And the real question, what was he so afraid of? Because for all his scheming, for all his mind games, Paul Heyman never truly believed Roman was gone for good. He just hoped that if he built his kingdom fast enough, Roman wouldn't want it back. But power isn't inherited in WWE. It's taken. And week after week, the cracks grew deeper. Seth's allies began to lose faith. Sami Zayn was ambushed twice in 2 weeks, once by unknown assailants, once in a match he was never booked to win. Becky Lynch was seen backstage, eyes red, voice hoarse, rumors swirled she was lobbying for her husband to relinquish the title. Jey Uso stopped showing up. Liv Morgan disappeared from storylines altogether. Raw wasn't just unraveling, it was dissolving. And then, the crowd began to turn. At first, it was chants. Where's Roman? This is boring. We want Rollins. But soon, it turned to apathy. Ticket sales slumped. Viewership dipped. Even the online community, which once thrived on Bloodline drama, began questioning whether the story was finally dead. Until one Reddit post changed everything. Anonymous. Unverified. A single line. Roman isn't gone. He's just waiting for the right betrayal. Within minutes, the community exploded. What betrayal? Who betrayed him? Was it Paul Heyman? Was it Seth? Was it Solo? Theories spiraled. Clips were dissected. Every episode of Raw for the past 3 months was rewatched, reanalyzed, reinterpreted. And one clip in particular set off a firestorm. An old backstage segment from 6 weeks prior. Seth Rollins walking past a monitor showing a Bloodline highlight reel. He stops. Smirks. And mutters, "Guess he's not so special without the titles." To most fans, it was nothing. But to Roman loyalists? It was a spark. Because if Seth ever disrespected Roman, publicly or privately, it could justify a return not of redemption, but revenge. And so the silence deepened. WWE leaned into the uncertainty. Michael Cole stopped referencing Roman altogether. Triple H dodged questions about him during interviews. Even the previously on Raw recaps scrubbed Roman's face from old footage. It was almost like the company was preparing to erase him. But you don't erase a king. You bury him, until he digs his way back out. And somewhere in all this, one man began to quietly resurface in fan discussion, Jon Moxley. He hadn't been seen in AEW in weeks. No promos. No appearances. No Dynamite segments. A house show cancellation due to personal matters. And then, a grainy photo, unconfirmed, surfaced online. A figure in a hoodie walking near the WWE Performance Center. The internet went wild. Conspiracy or not, the story had changed. Because if Jon Moxley and Roman Reigns were talking behind the scenes, then this wasn't just a comeback. This was a resurrection. The calm before the storm became deafening. Week after week, Raw tried to fill the void. Logan Paul made an appearance. LA Knight cut promo after promo. Rhea Ripley teased leadership in the women's division. But none of it stuck. None of it felt real. Because the audience had already turned the page in their minds. They were waiting for the next explosion. And that explosion came when the last person expected it. Roman didn't return at a pay-per-view. He didn't return at a WrestleMania. He didn't even return on a milestone show. He returned on an ordinary Raw. On a night no one was watching. On a night when Paul Heyman believed he was safe. When the crowd had almost given up. When the company stopped pretending anything was going to change. And that's when it happened. Because that's how storms work. Not with warning. But with impact. Before there was the Bloodline. Before Paul Heyman was the wisest man in the room. Before Seth Rollins became the visionary, before Jon Moxley went rogue and vanished into the shadows, there was a faction that changed everything. Not because they were dominant, but because they were dangerous. Together. The Shield. 3 men. 1 mission. And an oath sealed in violence, to take over WWE by force. In late 2012, the wrestling world didn't know what hit it. Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Dean Ambrose, now known to the world as Jon Moxley, stormed onto the scene during the main event of Survivor Series. They weren't called up gently. They weren't introduced in promos or vignettes. They arrived by impact, triple powerbombing Ryback through an announce table and costing John Cena a world title. No explanation. No mercy. No compromise. They weren't faces. They weren't heels. They were wolves. In tactical gear, armed with mic skills, brutality, and undeniable chemistry, the Shield wasn't just a faction, they were a revolution. One that didn't beg for a seat at the table. They flipped the table over and demanded everyone look up. Together, they dismantled every superstar WWE put in front of them. From Cena to Orton, from Daniel Bryan to The Undertaker himself. No one was safe. Not because the Shield were monsters, but because they were unified. Seth was the architect. The tactician. The one who could see 3 moves ahead. Ambrose, now Moxley, was the chaos. The unpredictability. The brawler with a death wish. Roman? Roman was the hammer. The enforcer. The silent storm with a Superman punch that could shut down revolutions. But behind that armor was something few noticed at first. They were brothers. Bound not by blood, but by something even stronger, shared ambition. A promise that they'd change the industry together or burn it down trying. And for nearly 2 years, they did. Until they didn't. Because the thing about brotherhood is it only takes one crack to bring the whole thing down. That crack came in June 2014. The night the world stood still. After months of war with evolution, battles so brutal they blurred the line between storyline and survival, the Shield stood tall. Triumphant. Unbroken. And then, Seth Rollins grabbed a steel chair. And drove it into Roman Reigns' spine. Then into Dean's ribs. Over. And over. And just like that, the dynasty ended. No one saw it coming. Not even Roman. Especially not Roman. Because that's the thing about betrayal, it always comes from those closest to you. Seth didn't just turn heel. He shattered trust. He burned down a dream. And in doing so, he declared something to the WWE Universe and his former brothers: I was never one of you. I was just waiting for the right time to move past you. And Roman never forgot that. Sure, on camera, they fought. They bled. They even teamed again, reluctantly, years later. But something inside Roman cracked that night. The hammer that once protected the Shield was now pointed at his former brothers. And Jon Moxley? He never recovered. The betrayal didn't just break up the team, it destroyed Dean Ambrose. Over the years, you could see the toll it took. The unstable promos. The violent matches. The isolation. Dean was no longer the man who debuted with fury and focus, he was wandering. Drifting. And then he left. Not with a bang. But with a whimper. In 2019, Dean Ambrose wrestled his final match in WWE, and walked away into the night. He didn't cry. He didn't turn around. He just vanished. And in his place, Jon Moxley was born. Harder. Meaner. Free. Moxley made a name for himself outside WWE, main eventing in AEW, collecting titles, unleashing a version of himself the PG era never allowed. But through it all, he never once forgot where he came from. Or who he bled beside. Or who betrayed him. So when Roman Reigns returned to Raw, with Moxley beside him, it wasn't nostalgia. It was unfinished business. Because while Seth Rollins may have won the initial war in 2014, Roman and Moxley were never at peace. They watched from afar as Seth called himself the Visionary. As he claimed to lead a locker room. As he stood in the ashes of the Shield and declared himself the only one strong enough to lead WWE into a new era. But what good is a visionary, when he can't see who's coming to destroy him? And now that Roman and Moxley have returned, together, the